Two men, two empires, two legends who never met. Yet history still argues over who would have won. One walked away undefeated in every battle he ever fought. The other brought Rome so close to destruction that mothers used his name to frighten their children for generations. Both were called monsters. Both were called geniuses. Only one word truly separates them: luck. Because in the end, brilliance on the battlefield was not enough to save either of them from ruin. This is the story of Alexander the Great and Hannibal Barca, and the terrifying question historians still cannot answer. Who was the greatest military mind who ever lived? To understand the answer, you have to go back to the moments that made them monsters on the battlefield. Alexander tamed a wild horse at 12 years old that grown men, seasoned riders, could not even approach. That horse, Bucephalus, would later carry him into every battle he ever fought, across 3 continents. Aristotle himself once tutored the boy, filling his head with philosophy and science before a single sword was ever placed in his hand. But philosophy could not save him from what happened next. Alexander was only 20 years old when his father was murdered, stabbed at a wedding feast in front of his own court. Overnight, a boy became king of a kingdom surrounded by enemies who smelled weakness. Generals doubted him. Rivals plotted against him. Persia, the largest empire on earth, barely noticed he existed. That arrogance would prove fatal. And it started at a river. At the Granicus, Alexander did something almost no commander would dare attempt. He led the charge himself, plunging his cavalry straight into the water under a wall of Persian spears. A blade came within inches of his skull. His helmet was split open in the chaos. He survived by a matter of seconds. And Persia learned, too late, that this king fought like a man with nothing to lose. Years later, at the fortress city of Tyre, Alexander faced a problem no army had ever solved. The city sat on an island, untouchable by land, protected by the sea itself. So Alexander built one. His engineers constructed a causeway straight across the ocean, stone by stone, under constant fire. It took 7 brutal months. But when it was finished, Tyre fell, and no city on earth felt safe again. Then came Gaugamela, the battle that would define him forever. Alexander faced a Persian army so massive that some ancient sources claimed it outnumbered his men 5 to 1. Chariots fitted with scythe blades waited in rows, built to shred his infantry into pieces. His officers begged him to attack at night, to hide his weakness in darkness. Alexander refused. He wanted Darius to see him coming and to fear it. Instead, he marched his line at a diagonal angle, stretching the Persian formation thinner and thinner until it began to tear apart. Then, through the gap his own trap had created, he drove his cavalry like a spear straight toward one man, King Darius himself. The Persian king panicked. He fled the battlefield, and his empire crumbled with him. In a single afternoon, the most powerful empire in the ancient world effectively ceased to exist. Alexander was not just lucky, he understood something most generals never grasp. Chaos can be engineered, not just endured. Even years later, deep in India, facing war elephants for the first time at the Hydaspes River, he adapted instantly. He split his forces in the dark, crossed a flooded river no one thought possible, and struck from a direction his enemy never expected. But there was a darker side to his brilliance. His own men began to fear him. Whispers of assassination followed him through Asia. He pushed his soldiers thousands of miles from home, deeper into unknown land, chasing a victory that would never fully satisfy him. Eventually, his own army refused to march any further. Alexander died at 32, his empire already fracturing before his body was even buried. He never lost a single battle in his entire life, and yet everything he built collapsed within years. Undefeated, but not unstoppable, Centuries later, a different kind of terror rose from the shores of North Africa. Rome believed itself untouchable. Then, a young Carthaginian commander decided to prove them wrong. Hannibal Barca made a promise as a child, a blood oath to destroy Rome. He kept that promise in the most impossible way imaginable. Instead of sailing across the sea like every general before him, Hannibal did something no one thought was possible. He marched an army, including war elephants, directly through the freezing, deadly passes of the Alps. Men froze. Elephants slipped from cliffs into the void. Supplies vanished into snowstorms. Thousands died before Hannibal even reached Roman soil. But the ones who survived became something Rome had never faced before. When Hannibal finally appeared in Italy, Rome refused to believe it was real. Then came Cannae, the battle that still haunts military academies today. Rome sent nearly 90,000 men to crush him once and for all. Hannibal had less than half that number. He should have lost. He should have been erased from history in a single afternoon. Instead, he curved his center line inward, luring the Romans deep into a trap shaped like a crescent moon. The Romans pushed forward, convinced they were winning. They were not winning. They were walking into a slaughter. Hannibal's cavalry closed the trap from behind, and the Roman army was surrounded on every side. What followed was one of the bloodiest single days in ancient warfare. Tens of thousands of Roman soldiers died before sunset. Rome had never experienced anything close to that level of devastation. For years afterward, Hannibal terrorized Italy. Undefeated, unstoppable, seemingly unbeatable. But total victory always slipped just out of his grasp. Rome refused to surrender. Instead, they changed strategy completely. They avoided open battle with Hannibal and instead struck Carthage itself, forcing him to return home to defend it. That decision led to the battle that would define his legacy forever. Zama. There, Hannibal finally faced a Roman general who had studied his own tactics against him. Scipio Africanus had learned from Hannibal's greatest weapon, surprise, and turned it back on him. For the first time in his life, Hannibal lost. One defeat was enough to end Carthage's fight against Rome forever. So who was greater, the undefeated king or the tactical mastermind who lost? Everything in a single afternoon? Historians still disagree, and the uncertainty itself is part of the legend. Alexander inherited an army built by his father, already trained, already feared. Hannibal built his war machine from nothing, deep in enemy territory, with almost no support from home. Alexander conquered because his enemies collapsed under pressure. Hannibal won because he outthought enemies who refused to collapse. Some historians argue Hannibal faced tougher opposition and achieved more with less. Others argue Alexander's record of 0 defeats speaks for itself. Neither answer fully satisfies the question, because greatness in war was never only about winning battles. It was about what happened after the fighting stopped. Alexander's empire shattered the moment he died, divided by generals who tore his legacy apart. Hannibal's homeland was eventually burned to the ground, its people scattered, its name nearly erased from history. 2 brilliant minds, 2 devastating downfalls. Imagine for a moment if these 2 men had faced each other on the same battlefield. One general who never lost, one general who invented deception itself. No historian can say for certain who would have walked away. And maybe that uncertainty is exactly why both names still echo more than 2,000 years later. Because true greatness is not measured only by victory. It is measured by how long the world keeps asking, who would have won? Alexander and Hannibal never met on a battlefield, but in the minds of everyone who studies war, that battle has never truly ended.